Gavin Newsom, the Democratic governor of California, was recently interviewed by Bill Maher, and part of the conversation turned to Newsom's aggressive rhetoric against the Republican Party. And in Maher's estimation, which was part praise and part condemnation, Newsom is, quote, mean, quote. And the governor gave a brilliant response to it. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert buttons before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, we have several clips to play. This is a great exchange between Governor Newsom and Bill Maher. And listen, just to kind of set the stage, the asymmetry of expectation that I constantly talk about and Luke Beasley talks about and others manifests itself in a variety of ways. And one of the ways it's most annoying is the asymmetry of expectations with respect to civility, right? Now, listen, I grew up in a red rural state. Many, if not most, of my family and friends are conservatives and Republicans. But the MAGA movement, particularly under Donald Trump, as a general movement, not everybody, just as a general movement, is a particularly cruel and uncivil movement, okay? And yet it seems to me that the expectation is always for Democrats to be nice and empathetic. We're always chastised, certainly by the right, but even by the center and by some elements of the so-called left, constantly saying, listen, Democrats, you need to be nicer and more empathetic to those on the right and those in the Republican Party. Just a complete asymmetry, whereas the right and the MAGA movement get to be as cruel as possible. Compare Donald Trump with Joe Biden, the leaders of these two movements. Donald Trump says all kinds of cruel things about people every damn day. And when Joe Biden gets even vaguely critical of anybody, people gasp and clutch their pearls, particularly on Fox News. So with all that in mind, that's the context for this exchange between Governor Newsom and Bill Maher. So we're going to play the clips and unpack them together.
Yeah. Well, I always said you make a great case. You know, I saw you debating DeSantis. I said, you know, I'm trying to get this guy to run for president for a long time. He looks like he'd be very good at it. What I liked with that also is you're kind of mean, and we need that. When you need to be, not over the top.
So there's where I say the half praise. So Maher is saying, listen, you're kind of mean, and we kind of need that. And it got applause, right? So it seems to me that Maher finds utility in this, which makes sense because Maher himself is kind of a prick, right? And then later on in the conversation, it kind of goes back to it with respect to Newsom's rhetoric. So we're going to play this clip, which is a bit longer, and then play some others as well.
But I feel like the last couple of years you've like purposely picked this fight with the red states. I mean, the DeSantis. Yeah, but I don't want to live in the Civil War country.
I agree with that.
You know what? Well, but you seem like you purposely want to set up this dichotomy between, oh, this is a blue state and that's a red state. Yeah. And I don't want to live in that country. I like Florida.
I'm with you. And by the way, I like Florida as well. I like all these states. I completely agree. I don't want to have a state of mind that's a constant fight or flight. We've gone through so much. We've been polarized and traumatized. There's been a tough 5-6 years across the globe, not just in this country. That said, I'm not going to sit back and watch. You made the point just a moment ago in your monologue. You got folks out there trying to bring us back to a pre-1960s world. America in reverse, rolling back voting rights, LGBTQ rights, women's rights, not just access to abortion, but contraception. I mean, it's a profound and consequential moment. And you could sit by and say, well, I really want to get along as these guys are rolling back the clock, or you can stand tall and assert yourself. And the reason I started to go into those red states, the reason I started to take on DeSantis, and the reason I started doing ads in these red states is I didn't feel my party was doing enough. It was CRT one year, and then it's ESG, and it's DEI, anything with 3 letters. These guys keep coming, and they're shape-shifting, and they're charming, and so, but it's true, right? And I just thought there was a little timidity in our party, and I thought we needed to call this stuff out. These guys are being on a banning binge across this country. You want to talk about cancel culture? Look at the Republican Party. Ask Bud Light, Target, Disney. That's just the private sector. Banning speech, not just in the classroom, but in the boardroom as it relates to issues of race. Look what they've done. 3,362 books just last year they're banning. This is a serious and consequential moment. It's the cultural purge that's going on in this country. And so I just felt like we needed to call that out as Democrats and put them on the defensive since we're consistently on our heels as a Democratic Party, even though I think the facts bear out our case significantly better than the case on the other side. But again,
and again, even Bill Maher is stunned into silence, even though he brought this criticism, a criticism which I don't understand coming from Bill Maher, who again is kind of this legendary jerk. But listen, Governor Newsom is exactly correct. And listen, I understand that a lot of people don't like Governor Newsom. I don't live in California, never lived in California, and my knowledge of California's, statewide policies is relatively limited. But what I will say, which I don't think is controversial at all, shouldn't be controversial at all for those of us from the center left to the far left, those of us who are not Republicans, not conservatives, and don't consider themselves centrist, the energy and the rhetorical style and the flourish that Newsom brings to the Democratic Party is good. I have not seen any compelling evidence or argument to the contrary. And listen, he's right. And I think the way that he answered the question was right, because he said, listen, ideally, we wouldn't have an us versus them mentality. I don't want that. It's traumatic. It's polarizing. It's hard. But we have to push back rhetorically, right? Because Republicans constantly, from Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Ron DeSantis, Greg Abbott, you name it, basically every major Republican leader has constantly demonized blue states, blue cities. Jim Jordan constantly puts it on his Twitter, talking about, Chicago, all Democratic run cities and how they're hellscapes and everything else. Why is it okay for Republicans and conservative thought leaders to speak with such hostility, not just half the country, but quite frankly, a majority of the country? Why is it okay for them to demonize and to dehumanize and to speak so harshly of tens of millions of people, more people than are on their side? But it's not okay for Gavin Newsom or others to kind of push back, especially like, listen, you open the door. Let's compare red states and blue states. Let's compare which states are generally more prosperous, better educated, more healthy, less dependent on federal subsidies, all the things. By those metrics, by and large, red states do worse than blue states. And those are simply facts. And Ben Shapiro always tells us, facts don't care about your feelings, gang. This asymmetry has got to stop. It is irrational, it's illogical, it's immoral, and it's also politically inexpedient. It allows the Republicans and the right to punch above their weight class because they can effectively dish it out, but they're never in a position where they have to take it. They're that person, on the playground who'll shove you down, but then you go to shove them back, and then they run and cry to the teacher, even though they were the ones who struck first, and then second and third and fourth. And this is just something I feel very passionate about. I think that the Democratic cause and the progressive cause in general, set particular party politics aside, but the broader ideology, it's inherently challenging. Being on the left or being aligned with the left is harder, ideologically speaking and politically speaking, than it is the right, because you're constantly pushing for change, and change requires effort and energy and power, right? Whereas to be conservative is to basically just rest on your laurels, relatively speaking. And so we're making that job so much harder when we also say they get to say and do whatever the hell they want. And we have to constantly mind our manners and watch our words. And it doesn't even matter when President Biden gives a speech, 2 years ago at Independence Hall, when he called out extreme MAGA Republicans, he bent over backwards to say that it wasn't referring to all Republicans or even most Republicans, and they still condemned that speech. And most Americans actually found the speech divisive because we all grade Republicans and the right on a curve. We have to stop doing it. I'm going to play a couple of other clips that are non-Newsom related. This was something from the Fox Propaganda Network and Harris Faulkner kind of making my point for me when she talks about what side, in her opinion, is really animated by hate.
I see for the left is that there's just so much hate. There's hate toward the 75 million people, and they're all lumped together, called MAGA. There's hate toward the former president, and they'll go after him with everything they've got. I mean, pretty soon, doesn't hate have to give way to love? I mean, you got to have some positivity. Anyway, I got to run.
And apparently the guy here, the older gentleman beside her, is apparently like a former Democratic strategist. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. But it's like, okay, let's take everything you said at face value. Let's say the left hates 75 million people. That is bad. But the right hates 82 million people, the 82 million who voted for Joe Biden. Why is that okay? And you talk about hating a president. What about Let's Go Brandon or FJB? What about the hate that's being directed at President Biden from the MAGA movement and the Republican Party? Why don't you care about that? And especially because I thought the Fox Propaganda Network used to be all about, you're supposed to unite behind the sitting president. You're supposed to put, country above party and be patriots, right? That was what they always told us when President Bush was in office, and even to one extent or another when Donald Trump was in office. But again, apparently that's only for Republicans. When Democrats are in power, you can be as mean and divisive as you want. You don't have to unite behind the president and show respect and courtesy. That asymmetry is despicable. And Jessica Tarlov actually threw that in the face of all people, Kayleigh McEnany, the blonde there, who used to work for Donald Trump as his press secretary. I love what Jessica Tarlov has to say here.
A while ago. Obviously, Hillary Clinton is someone who is incredibly important to the party, and I have defended her comments in that interview, talking about the fact that Democrats are so far from being in a cult on a comparative basis to Republicans. It's actually laughable, and I do really struggle to find it in my tiny liberal heart to feel terrible for Republicans when we get called things like communists, socialists, thugs, pedophiles. Donald Trump called Democrats every name in the book. It is part of the Republican playbook to demonize us and to make it seem like it is the end of the world if Democrats are in power.
She's right. And that is why, and you probably, if you follow me on Twitter or if you see me in Reddit or in conversations and debates I've had with other people, why I'm so firm on this. I refuse to comply with the double standard. If people want me to be nicer to the Republican Party, then they must with equal vicious fervor demand that the Republican Party be nicer to other people. This is not a one-way street. I refuse to accept that. And so should you, quite frankly. You should absolutely categorically reject it. And when you're in conversations with people, friends, family, debates, maybe you also debate with other people, you should also point that out. If you want civility back in politics, great. I would love that. The West Wing is one of my favorite shows, and I know a lot of people talk smack about it, but it'd be great if we lived in that kind of world, right? But if you want it, then Republicans have to do it too. Republicans need to start showing respect to President Biden. They need to start showing respect to the Democratic Party. They need to show respect to the left in general and to marginalized groups, to minorities and women and LGBTQ community and things like that. We have to start doing that. What we're not going to do and what we should never allow is a one-sided civility in which only the right and MAGA and Republicans benefit. And until they get that, I am all for the rhetorical aggression of Gavin Newsom and others and I hope that the Democratic Party starts to pick that up with a quickness in the near future. Let me know what you think in the comments.